Thank you so much for watching Landom C Goes There. Please subscribe and hit the like button and the bell notification button. Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker were two of the most popular celebrity criminals of the 1930s, and they had a lot of competition for that decade. More than 30 years later, America completely fell in love with them all over again through the smash hit movie Bonnie and Clyde. The film spoke to the dissatisfaction and unrest that people, especially young people, felt in 1967. It was directed by Arthur Penn, and it starred Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway in the lead roles. It also featured Michael J. Pollard, Gene Hackman, and Estelle Parsons. The production is considered one of the first films of the new Hollywood era. It broke many cinematic taboos, and for some members of the counterculture, the film was considered a rallying cry. Its big success prompted other filmmakers to be more open in presenting sex and violence in their films. The film's ending scene became iconic and is considered one of the most visual in cinematic history. The movie was intended as a romantic and comedic version of the violent gangster films of the 1930s, updated with modern filmmaking techniques. The director portrayed some of the violent scenes with a real comedic tone, sometimes really reminiscent of the Keystone Cop-style slapstick films. He then shifted into horrific and graphic violence. Once the initial negotiations for the project had kind of failed, Warren Beatty was introduced to it, and he liked the idea. He wanted to see the script, and he bought the rights. Beatty offered the directing position to George Stevens, William Wyler, and Sidney Pollack, just to name a few. All of them turned it down, and Penn turned the project down several times before Beatty finally persuaded him to direct the film. Initially, Beatty was only in the producer's chair, and at that time, his sister, actress Shirley MacLaine, was a strong possibility to play Bonnie. But when Beatty decided to play Clyde, they needed a different actress. Faye Dunaway ended up getting this role just by the skin of her teeth. When Beatty met with Dunaway, he didn't think she was right for the part at all. But he told her to go ahead and meet with the director just to see what he said about it, and he loved her. He thought she was perfect for the role. The writers of the film are two guys named Benton and Newman, and at the time they had worked for Esquire magazine as an editor and an art director, and they had no screenwriting experience at all. They loved the story of Bonnie and Clyde because Benton grew up in the Dallas area, where he heard his entire life stories about these two characters. And Benton's father actually attended Clyde's funeral in 1934. But these two didn't have any experience writing movies at all. But they did have a well-connected friend of a friend who put them in touch with some French filmmakers. It was through these connections that the script fell into the hands of Warren Beatty, who immediately contacted them and set the project into motion. The very first drafts had Clyde swinging both ways. The writers worked closely with Beatty and the director in fine-tuning the screenplay, which all four of them would later describe as a very positive, low-conflict collaboration. The only major problem they had to do with sex. Newman and Benton's version had Bonnie and Clyde having a threesome with C.W. Moss, played by Michael J. Pollard, who is a composite character based on several members of Bonnie and Clyde's gang. The whole idea about this was that Clyde couldn't perform well with Bonnie without a third party. Beatty claimed that he had no problem playing this role as a bisexual character, but he and Penn were both concerned that the audience would view Clyde as a deviant, and that this was the reason that he was breaking all the rules. The director really thought that the idea of there being some kind of sexual dysfunction in the group was really important to him. Eventually, these 4 collaborators settled on Clyde being impotent. The studio hated the film from the very start, and they thought it was going to be a big flop, and they treated it accordingly. Jack Warner, he measured films according to how well they convinced him not to leave the screening room to use the bathroom. He hated Bonnie and Clyde. He said that's the longest 2 hours and 11 minutes that he had ever seen. He called it a 3-bathroom picture. Now, that lack of faith in the film made Warren Beatty very, very rich by the time everything was said and done. Thinking the film just wouldn't make any money at all, Warner Brothers offered Beatty a ridiculous deal. They offered him a $200,000 salary plus 40% of the gross. That's unbelievable. 40% of the gross, not the net. The film made more than $50 million. This movie not only influenced Hollywood, it inspired fashion fads too. Faye Dunaway's period costumes caught the attention of the fashion-minded, and soon berets were back in vogue. That trend coincided with French designers wanting to move from miniskirts to maxi skirts and gave women an appealing example of how great a maxi could really look on them. Initially, Faye Dunaway was kind of hard-headed about the role and didn't want to wear dresses at all. She wanted to wear slacks as Bonnie Parker, since the character would need to move freely to race in and out of getaway cars. But the costume designer suggested that she go for a more glamorous look with these long skirts and berets with short jackets. And in doing so, she created a whole new fashion trend. Now, this movie has a really kinky energy to it. And when you combine it with its glamorization of these 2 criminals, it definitely shocked audiences for the time. Sex symbol Warren Beatty plays against his type in the role as an impotent guy. Through his impotence, the director makes the provocative suggestion throughout the film that his gun, in a certain sense, replaces his shortcomings as a man. This can be observed in one scene where Bonnie Parker strokes the barrel of this gun with it positioned directly in front in his lap and pointing upwards towards her. This brief but very lewd visual metaphor highlights the connection between Bonnie and Clyde's horrific crimes and their sexual attraction. When this passionate pair first meet, Bonnie seductively puts the neck of a Coke bottle close to her plump lips, a very clear reference of what she wanted to do to Clyde. Take a look back at this fascinating film from the mid-'60s. It's a really well-done production, and I think you'll really enjoy revisiting it again. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.